You ready to get on? Shall we get underway? Or? Would you like to?
Yes.
Okay, that's great.
Yes.
Right. It really is my pleasure, just to introduce this session. And I know that Joan and Janice and Bernie wanted to be as interactive as possible. Sue O'Neill, who's down on the programme and has done quite a bit of work with parents, can't be here today, but I know that the three of you are really open to any kind of questions that might come in relation to Sue's work on parents. And so what we're just going to do is, it's just that Joan and Janice and Bernie are just going to say a few words to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go straight into the presentation. But it will be, hopefully, the feeling that you can actually engage in a conversation with the three of them. After about 45 minutes, you'll see me just signalling to Janice that we're going to actually pause so Bernie can come in with a dramatic presentation. Is that clear in terms of...
Presentation about the drama, yes.
Okay.
We have got a little bit at the beginning then. Yes. Quite right.
Not really, but I will check about the video, because usually you see we video, but it's actually just on, it's a self-video, not, each other. Okay, so that's why the camera is on, but it's for basically self-evaluation. Okay, not yourself. Okay, thank you. Are you okay?
Yes, absolutely fine. Okay. Well, I'm Joan Walton from Liverpool Hope University, and I'm a director of the Centre for the Child and Family. And the overall research question that we're addressing, and which this particular project is part of, is what is up? How do we individually and collectively integrate research and practice in order to improve the well-being of children?
My name is Janice Darke-Sutcliffe, and I work for the local authority in Liverpool as an early years teacher advisor in the school effectiveness service, and I've got a particular responsibility for SEN and inclusion in that team.
Good afternoon. My name is Bernie Hughes. I'm also from Hope University, and my role in this collaborative inquiry is the creative use of drama and how it can contribute to our research question. Okay. And in keeping with that, and because we use drama in the course of the collaborative inquiry, we're going to just give some of the context and the background to the collaborative inquiry using a dramatic dialogue before we then go on to explain the context of the inquiry and the methodology. Okay. So, it's over a year since you were approached by Janice at Liverpool Hope University, Joan.
Yes, Janice was getting really frustrated because lots of money had been spent on training for practitioners in early years settings.
Yes, but there haven't been any really significant improvements in practice.
So Janice, you were looking for a different way of working, and because of your experience in action research, and particularly in practitioner research, you were interested in developing this kind of practice-based learning.
Yes, that's right, and this project gave me the chance to be innovative and to explore a different way of working with the practitioners. And I haven't been given that opportunity before.
So we're talking here about what you see as a new way of learning.
Yes, exactly. I thought it would be a new way to think about that learning, and in joining up with the university, establish a way of linking theory and practice.
We worked with a group of practitioners who had never before seen themselves as potential researchers. They saw research as something that only academics did.
Yes, and that's what the challenge was, enabling practitioners to understand that through reflection they could research their own practice.
As an integral part of their own continuing professional development.
Yes, and recognising the difference between this approach and traditional training, which often takes the form of top-down approaches to change. Because as I said, although we'd spent thousands of pounds over the years on training, the actual changes in practice and in ways of working
Well, there wasn't any change, really.
Well, no, there wasn't any significant change, and it wasn't really making a difference. It wasn't really having that impact on children's lives.
Now, where you were coming from, Joan, was from working with professionals from a range of children's services, and you were getting frustrated because it didn't matter how good the training course was.
And the participants would appear to enjoy the course, the feedback would be good.
And in the best courses, the learning can be very good, and there can be a big shift in thinking.
Yet somehow, this new knowledge that was gained wasn't being transferred into practice.
Yes, that's right, because often there would be issues back in the workplace that was making it difficult for practitioners to put their learning into practice.
Yes, so there are often issues in the workplace, and we often have lots of good ideas, but it's hard to implement them for all sorts of reasons.
And yet I knew there was excellent work being done in practice that was not being recognised and was not informing research and policy development.
So, you wanted to use practitioner action research to bring
The world of the professional
In the world of the academic,
together.
So, how do we actually improve practice in our settings, in early years settings?
And really impact on children's lives.
In ways that are transformational.
What I wanted to do was to ground research in the experience of the practitioners.
And what I was wanting to do was to look at where does change happen? Does it happen from reading books?
Does it happen through following the instructions of leaders?
or does it have to start with the practitioners themselves?
Who has got the power to affect change? And it's not as simple as you might think, it's very complex. And people don't usually look at the practitioner's role in this.
So we were both interested in exploring ways, exploring not just information and knowledge, but how transformational learning happens for practitioners.
That's right. So when we met, you said we could explore this in an inquiry. But it was only after meeting a few times that I began to understand about collaborative inquiry and that it was very much a process.
You came with a huge opportunity because you were coming with questions.
How does sustainable change happen? Where and how is knowledge created?
And really what it is all about is how to improve practice.
And everyone who wishes can research the question, how can I improve my practice, using a living theory approach to action research.
Yes, and in this project that Joan and I set up, the research methodology included both collaborative inquiry and living theory. So I'm going to start really right back at the beginning when we were thinking about creating a group and how that all started and giving a sense of that. As I explained before, part of my job, I had the responsibility of working with SENCOs in PVI settings, and I organised regular networks for the SENCOs. And part of me, I was thinking about maybe some of the barriers that were preventing the practitioners from putting the training that they'd received into practice and taking it forward in their work settings. And as we just said, we were I was looking at trying to find a new way of working with them, a different way of engaging with practitioners. And at this point, from my own experience, I just completed my master's at Pengreen Early Childhood Centre, and I'd undertaken a practitioner research project, and I had some understanding of what practitioner research was about, and about it being a participatory process, whereby people engage together to explore some significant aspect of their lives, and in understanding it better, some sort of transformation came about. So I knew that, I'd experienced something of that in my work, in my experience at Pengreen. So that's where I started. So I tried to take that notion and to gather around people that might be interested. And I'd also read the work of John Heron when he talks about researchers initiating the inquiry, and calling on an existing group to join in an inquiry. And that's what I did. So at the network, we had about 50 Senkos there. I spoke to them, and I was experiencing what John Heron describes as having a difficult tension to manage. Because I had the sense that if I was too insistent about what I wanted and about what my aims and interests were, that might risk dependency and resistance or even alienation on perhaps some of the people there. And that's exactly what I didn't want. But on the other hand, the practitioners themselves wanted to know what was this about. And their understanding was very much in terms of training, and I was thinking this was going to be another training course. So that was quite a difficult tension to manage at the time. And I discussed with the idea of people being open to engage in a process. And that's where Joan and Jack came to the rescue. So we arranged for an initial meeting about the collaborative inquiry, where interested parties could come along and find out more and begin the process. And so from the initial network of about 50, we got about 30 turning up for that first event, and that was a very significant event, really. In the end, I'll talk more about that later, but in the end, we ended up working with 11 settings, and many Senkos, but also managers and practitioners in the rooms as well. So that was how the group got established. Carry on and explain a little bit more about that.
I just wondered, because we all know each other, okay? But I just wondered if you'd just like to introduce, because you may already know that group.
Yeah, I in fact work at Liverpool.
Yeah, so that, but would you mind just saying for us? And
Yeah,
then,
sure.
so what is it that you're working on?
I work in teacher education. Student teachers on undergraduate, postgraduate programs across primary and secondary.
Yeah, it's just, is it okay just to do this?
Yeah, let's do
Yes.
yes, you.
It's just that what I don't think, would you mind just saying?
I'm Ingrid Spencer, I'm at Leicester University and I lecture in English and media predominantly, not exclusively, on primary and secondary.
It's just that,
And just for their benefit, I think.
I'm Sonia Hutchison, I'm from both the North East Somerset and I run a carer centre, and I'm looking at how I can introduce kind of mindful and learning culture into schools.
Sorry, what's the carer centre?
It works with people who have caring responsibility for somebody in their family, they're unpaid, and they might provide support for somebody who's got an illness, disability, mental health illness, drug or alcohol addiction. You might have young carers, so I work with adult carers.
And I'm Chris Jones, SEN manager, working with the local authority and doing a PhD at Liverpool Hope University.
Nigel Harrison, I manage the inclusion service within Bath North East Somerset, doing a PhD with Liverpool Hope.
okay.
Okay, and I'm doing a presentation tomorrow morning of where I'm coming from, just professionally, educationally, in a little bit more detail. But just for today, just talking about where I was coming from when talking to Janice from the local authority, I've only recently entered the academic world in the last 2 years, really. Before that, I have done social work education in the past and also been a social worker and been involved a lot in education from an independent centre. But I'm just really quite concerned, just really wanting to bring the academic and the professional world closer together. That is my main remit, and finding that very, very difficult to do within the professional world. So I entered an academic context to look at that, which is why that overall meta-research question came from, is how do we integrate research and practice across professions and between disciplines in its full form, really, to improve the well-being of children and young people. And I see that in any setting. In a sense, even Sonia, although you don't directly work with children now, you're working with adults who care for children, so you've got to care for the families if you're going to look after the children. We certainly see it as relevant for schools, and in fact, people whose background come from teacher education, I don't actually, but talking about the well-being of children in schools. So the whole research question encompasses anybody who is is really interested in any context. How do we create a society which is okay for future generations of children to grow up in? So it's expanded as that, really. But so to me, the challenge is how do we bring the two together? And so action research, obviously, in terms of the methodology, helps in that, because that is about bringing together the action, the reflection of the action, and research in practice. But I think that the challenge in this particular context was when Janice came in, I think she was saying before, had a passion about practitioner-research. And some of the reason, the reading that I did about the nature of the academy or the nature of the university was BERA. And I don't know whether you've come across BERA from 1990, an American professor who really felt strongly that the university was going in the wrong direction, in the sense that it was only, and recent things at Liverpool Hope, I think people have sympathy with this, a real emphasis on research to the detriment of other aspects of what he considered to be scholarship. And part of that was teaching. Now in the academic context I came in, there's a real bit of, hopefully it will balance out now, but there really has been an emphasis on research, and really hasn't been a similar kind of emphasis to date on the quality of teaching. But it's not, Boyer suggested it wasn't just the research and teaching, it was actually about how you relate the learning to practice, how you bring together the research, the teaching, and then the practice. So I was always very interested from coming into the university about how we could make the university relevant to people working in a professional life, and how professionals could inform the academic context, and how the academic could become more relevant for practitioners. And that seemed to me to be a real challenge, because they just seem compartmentalised. And then the fourth part of Boyer, which if I do this quickly is comes the final bit in the middle, is in his idea of scholarship was bringing together the integration of disciplines. So again, in terms of my meta-research question, this is across different professions and across the disciplines, so really multidisciplinary, interprofessional, and how you bring all that together. And he felt that it was integrating all of these that is what true scholarship should be about, and that it shouldn't be one at the expense of the other. So part of the challenge for me within the centre was, how do you develop a centre that allows this kind of principle, this kind of ethos to be adhered to? So one of the things in terms of the research methodology in this particular project, and I have to say I'm interested in it in a wider context, is this focus on the starting point for the professional in any professional practice is how do I improve what I do? How do I become a better practitioner? How do I develop my professional skills? And a living theory approach to action research offers this, in that living theory is the process of, involves the individual thinking about what really matters to me, what's important to me, how do I want to make a difference in the world, how do I want to improve what I do in a professional context. Anything that's about improving practice within that kind of professional life opens up that opportunity for what the theories that are going to inform me. And the living comes because actually this is a dynamic ongoing process that is being influenced at any point in time by influences, by thoughts, by readings, whatever. So my theory about what's important, if you read theories like behaviour modification theory, it's pretty static. You give children a star sheet, and if they do very well, they get a gold star. If they don't do so well, they get a silver star. And that same model perpetuates. I've just seen institutions work by this. So that is one theory about how to get children behaving better. Whereas if that same person is working with this same young people and thinking about how do I improve my practice, they'll work in one way with that. They might start off with that star chart, but by their observations or their reflections, find actually that's not having quite the impact they want, so let's adjust it a bit, or then they might decide to change it completely. So it's a very dynamic process. So living theory allows for testing out all those other different models, but sees them always as an ongoing process and evolving. And it's rooted, though, in values-based practice. So then when you're working with those young people and you're wanting to kind of influence their behaviour in some way, what kind of values are you coming from? So you're coming from values which actually really respect those young people as individuals, really wants the best for them, really wants to think about how they experience the world and do something about it? Or are you coming from a value base that is saying, well, actually, I'm the teacher, and these are the young people, and I have the authority, and they need discipline, and they need structure, and they need to respond to respect me in the sense of doing what I tell them. And actually, if you come from that value base, you're not likely to be interested in a living theory approach because you're not going to be prepared to be too flexible about where you're coming from. Whereas if you're coming from a value base which is interested in social justice or is interested in how do I improve what I do, is wanting to think about who I am and how I operate in different contexts and is willing to take feedback and modify that, then that again is what this living theory approach allows for. Moving on from that then, I was also interested in collaborative inquiry. The slight danger, and this is up for debate and I'd be really open for this, is that you start getting too stuck in the eye. And as you saw even with living theory, the idea is, you know, what are the influences on me, but how do I influence other people? And how do I spread the learning through? How do I share what I'm learning with other people in the workplace so that I don't become too isolated? So collaborative inquiry is when a group of people have a shared question. And Janice mentioned John Herring, and John Herring has written tomes, but a full book on cooperative inquiry. And he's very structured, and he takes it to some extreme, has, you know, the devil's advocate, you've always got someone challenging you in terms of what you're doing, and it's a very, you know, very structured process. So I want to take those kind of principles that here involves 2 or more people researching a topic through their own experience of it, using a series of cycles between experiencing something and reflecting on that experience, and where everybody is a co-subject in the experience phases and a co-researcher in reflecting on it. And so it just allows for a group of people to come together and to look at how they can work together in a shared practice, on a shared principle. So within a university faculty, for example, the way that would work is a group of people coming together and saying, how can we work together collectively in this faculty to make it a really exciting, enjoyable place for us as lecturers to work in, and at the same time to improve the quality of experience for students. And I'd love to see that kind of dynamic happening. But many people, and if anybody, you know, came to Nigel and Chris's and Marie's symposium this morning, that's what Nigel's trying to do in his children's services organisation. Janice in Liverpool is having a different kind of experience. But if you take a living theory integrated with a cooperative inquiry, you begin to get that kind of ethos. Now I'd just like to stop it there a little bit, I guess, and just have a discussion around that, just to get people's response.
That'd be really good. And again, there's one thing it does seem worth stressing, and whilst you're from Liverpool Hope, you know, so what is your name again? It's just that one thing you might not know is that at Liverpool Hope, they've got a statement of purpose, okay, in their faculty of education, which I haven't seen in any university in any part of the world, and it's what attracted me to go there and just support it. And it is this statement that all knowledge and understanding that they believe they are creating in Liverpool Hope, in the faculty of education, is emerging from values related to love and hope. So I'd never ever seen that status of purpose, and so it's in that context of collaboration as well, with that value, you know, those values, that we can also evaluate and be accountable to each other. And I just wanted to stress that because it seems to be such an important environment to really be researching in. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, I just, you know, you come from a university context, Jan, we met at Liverpool Hope, you know, just in terms of Boyer's idea of what a scholarship should look like, and taking together these kind of methodologies to try and influence what goes on. And just, you know, and the three of you, I'd just be really interested if you think it's useful, interesting, relevant, realistic, just any kind of response to it from anyone, really.
Shall I kick off?
Yeah, please.
I think it would be great if that was the way it was, and to me that's the way it should be. And I suppose as somebody who came to a university context from being a teacher, being an advisory teacher in the local authority, and then coming into the world of university, I really struggle with this notion of research as God. feel that I'm researching all the time when I'm teaching. And yet that's not seen as of value because it's not published in an academic journal. So I really struggle with that tension. And I think he's right, and it's the first time I've seen it, but to me, you know, there is this tension between research and practice all the time. And I in fact, when I first came to Liverpool Hope, and people talked about the academics, I thought, are they talking about me? You know, I've never seen myself as an academic. I'm a teacher, and a teacher educates, so that's how I kind of prefer to be seen. And also this, I'm really interested in what you're saying about bringing theory and practice together, because obviously I work with student teachers. So I don't see myself as imparting theory to them, but sometimes they see what we're saying as theoretical and not possible in the real world of the classroom which they go into, so that we have lots of conversations about that. And I feel that over time at the university we're being pushed much more to giving them theory. That's what we're being asked to do more, and to stop modelling the classroom in the university. You know, that's being we're being told not to do that, really. Not to model the classroom in the university, which is how I do everything. Because they get that classroom experience in school, the university should be giving them something else. So I think it's really interesting.
And just as a matter of interest, because you were talking yesterday about signing up for a PhD, has it been suggested to you that exactly what you've been talking about, you feel you research your practice all the time, you will work with students, could be your PhD?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which should then hopefully move that on, because that's what you would be doing, that's where you would come in.
I mean, I'm not anti-research, I think people think I am. Probably because things I say, because I'm not somebody who modifies what they say, which, you know, I don't have that kind of regulation in my head that says don't say that, don't say that. Which I probably should learn to have more of. But I don't see the point of research that doesn't have an impact on practice. That's the top and bottom of it for me.
And maybe actually, as you were talking about your first meetings, you know, with the groups, you know, that notion also of what research was about. I think for the practitioners, this is really important, how their perception of what research was about and seeing themselves as researchers was a really enormous leap. It was almost unimaginable, and so that kind of bringing the two worlds together, it was, you know, this was the kind of key thing really, and in fact sort of dissolve those barriers and that sense that there is something here, and that you're not a researcher if you're, in a setting.
That's very significant, because you were saying there are lots of challenges to why isn't learning being transferred back in the setting, and there is a lot around hierarchical structures and systems and all sorts of different ways, and that was one that was certainly just in the nature of the collaboration. Shall I carry on the story a little bit?
Just a little comment really. I think it's absolutely right, I totally agree with you, and having been a teacher and psychologist and so on there. But there's also a bit about research, and it just leaves questions hanging there. And we were coming up yesterday and looking through the independent, and it said about 20% of children are not are finding lessons too easy for them. Now, it's just left there. That can come across as blaming. So the teachers are getting this bloody wrong then, aren't they? Well, on a statistical curve, you could probably work that out. Somebody's not going to do that. The real question is, how do I improve what I do to engage those 20% of pupils? And that's the sort of bit that's just left hanging in some ways. And it comes across to teachers sometimes as blame. Because tell us we got it wrong again. You know, we can never get it right. You know. And I think there is a resentment somewhere in the profession about research to a certain extent.
That kind of research that just describes
yes, it's also so what?
Yeah.
You know, and I don't mean that, you know, it's obviously important to engage them, but help us as practitioners, and that's why I really think the joining up of the research, which is important, and the practitioners to say we've got to do something about it in our classroom. It's okay in the university write a paper, but that's got implications for us. help us. We can help you understand the classroom and what it really is like in the classroom now.
Yeah, can I just add very quickly before you go on? There's something at the beginning where you started, and because I'd seen and Bernie helped to coordinate this in the sense of a dramatic performance. Now, it's only now, it's at the last experience, I've begun to understand how important that can be, both for research, but also focusing on the nature of a collaboration. And I don't know how you felt about that presentation at the beginning, because Bernie,
we will come back to that later because I'll talk a little bit about what happened with practitioners, and also that that opening piece is a little bit of verbatim. It's one of the things that we use just as a means of evidence. So different ways of evidencing, the process, and practice, and so we probably can discuss a little bit later.
Okay, great.
Which is a dramatic bit from 2 Okay. Right, so I'm just going to just explain a little bit more about the actual group. So, because I think in research, there's lots of research in schools, happens in schools, but actually the group of practitioners that we were working with were practitioners from private, voluntary and independent nurseries. So these are practitioners who work with the very youngest children from age 0 to 5. So they're working with the statutory frameworks, and yet traditionally they have a very low status in society. Many of them are paid just above minimum wage, if not minimum wage. So very, very lowly paid. A lot of the practitioners, a sort of a sense of they just play with children, and the value of their work not being seen, and really being seen as not teachers, not the real professionals. And there, as again, there's not there's not much research really into this, but Julia Manning-Morton did some research, and she concluded that as a group, they often felt neglected, undervalued, and unsupported compared with their colleagues working with older children. And she noted that in such circumstances, it's difficult for them to develop a sense of professional self-worth. And I could experience that. I experienced that myself, working with this sector. And so that was something that was very significant, really, to bear in mind and came to the fore. But yet, they're playing such an important part in children's lives, and in a very significant period of children's development where a lot of learning goes on. So that was really when I approached the university in the first place, with the intention of undertaking practitioner research, because I knew that undergoing practitioner, being involved in that process, it would recognise, and it had to recognise the skills, the knowledge, the understandings of practitioners, their competencies, and it was a way of working from the grassroots up, rather than what we have been doing, which we have a lot of, with national strategies, where we've got top-down approaches to change. And I know right from the start, when I said that first meeting with Joan and Jack, with the practitioners, it just started off, Jack asked, well, what really matters to you as individuals, as people? And talk about it, share with the person next door, talk about what you've done well, something that you've done well. And there was this amazing energy in the room, I remember it, and yet some people, when we talked about the stories afterwards, one of the managers said that she was there with 3 of the practitioners from the rooms, and she knew them to be brilliant practitioners and some super things, and yet they were like, well, I don't know, really did not know what to say. And it took the manager to say, yeah, but can you remember you did this, and remember you worked with that child that way. And another practitioner, a manager, she talked about one of her stories that she shared with us later, was that first meeting when Jack talked about what she knew and her embodied knowledge,
that for her was very significant because she'd never recognised that really, and never really been asked about her. And so that was something very significant really. So the project, it was important that as part of the proposal for the project that we allowed time, that we gave practitioners time not just to come out to work in the collaborative inquiry and attend those meetings, but to have time back in their setting to reflect, maybe write or read or just engage with the process really, and that they actually have dedicated time to do that. And I think they found it very strange because they were coming to these meetings and they were talking and sharing, and it didn't feel like work, certainly didn't feel like training, but actually the significance of their stories as the process unfolded became very, very important to the whole process of inquiry and sharing the stories. So I just briefly want to, because it was a collaborative inquiry, you know, we shared our stories as well, and so that was important. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my story in relation to this, and I mentioned that I did my dissertation at, it was actually Leicester, the University of Leicester, for the Pen Green Centre, and I've got my little comfort blanket here, which is my dissertation. I would say that undertaking this, this was a transformative learning experience for me. And actually after doing it, I couldn't go back to working as I'd done before. And I had to, that's where I really, I mean, I wasn't happy with top-down approaches to change before, but I came out empowered to really challenge those, and a lot of the emphasis, I think as I said before, we had a lot of new materials coming, a lot of emphasis on what learning was needed to happen, and actually why, but not really so much about the how. How does learning happen? And I think I was seeing that as a bit of a missing link. So really, how does learning happen? And understanding, my understanding as a teacher of how young people have heard of Reggio and Elia, where they talk about their image of the child as a competent learner, as a powerful learner. And I reflected on that, and I'm thinking, is my image of the practitioner as a competent learner and a positive thing. So I really want to talk to you a little bit about what was it about my experience in Pen Green that resulted in this transformative learning myself, which I think in turn has affected what I did. So I have to pick up on this word, this big long word, which is not mine, and I finished pedagogical isomorphism. So there was two things when I went to when I went to Pen Green that well, there was lots of things, but really key things when I look back was a key text really, and it was about engaging in dialogue, and it was the works of Paolo Freire, whose writings show that in the process of developing reflective thought, it's essential to understand how this is done, and that it's done on equal terms, and that everyone's knowledge and understanding holds equal worth, that all contributions are valued and listened to with humility, so that what others bring to that encounter, their perspectives and their understandings, can be acknowledged as the way to learning more together than we can ever do in isolation from each other. And the quotes here that, and I remember just reading this and thinking it just changed me really. Men and women who lack humility, or who have lost it, cannot come to people, cannot be their partners in naming the world. Someone who cannot acknowledge himself to be as mortal as everyone else still has a long way to go before he can reach the point of encounter. At the point of encounter, there are neither utter ignoramuses nor perfect sages. There are only people who are attempting together to learn more than we now know. And that was the driver for a lot of this idea of pedagogical isomorphism was actually a phrase coined by, I must get the name right, let me see, coined by two researchers who were looking into, were evaluating the national professional qualification for integrated leadership that was being run at Penguin Centre. And they described this as happening within Penguin Centre. And even though I wasn't part of the MPQIL, the same tutors tutored me on my MA, and so I know that's been a lived experience for me, and it was very significant. And really, actually, I'll explain what Margie Warney, who's the director of the centre, said about pedagogical isomorphism. It can be defined as the modelling of dialogue. We said about that with Paulo Freire, the importance of that. Reflection, celebration of differences, containment and challenge by tutors and mentors in their interaction with participants. An approach which participants then demonstrated in their roles as leaders of integrated centres in their work with staff. Staff would in turn mirror this way of working in their interactions with children and families using the services. And this idea of providing a forum, which I believe the collaborative inquiry did, where we had opportunities for reflection and dialogue, we talked a bit about that, but also this containment as well as challenge, and I think that was linking a little bit with what Nigel was saying earlier before. So yeah, what I was going to say about that actually through the group, through the collaboration, the practitioners began to reveal their thoughts, their values, their beliefs, but also their feelings in a situation which was sufficiently containing, so that the disclosure of whatever it was they were sharing kind of changed the practitioner's relationship to maybe the thing they were struggling with. And the fact that they had been listened to, they had been respected and valued, provided the nutrients really, which countered the toxic effects of what may have been happening back in the settings. And so what happened? What were the outcomes? Well, I think perhaps it will help you see that actually it became very clear. We've got stories and we've got evidence of this too, that practitioners were learning to value themselves, and there was a big shift in how they saw themselves, and then in turn in the value of the work they did, and the significance, they recognised the significance of the value of their work. And that relates into this whole idea of every moment counts, and this was really taken on board by the group. Well, it grew from the group, and that their moment-to-moment interactions with the children in their care, they really understood that. And also, we introduced the idea of mindfulness, and I think Bernie's going to go on and talk a little bit more about this later. But that was a very significant learning that came out. And also, the challenges, their challenges, and the importance of working with parents was another big key learning that came out of the group. And Sue was going to share some of that with you, but she's not here today. But that really was.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it links in with what you were saying earlier about the work with feeling undervalued, because in fact, with parents, there was a lot of talk about the feeling, that tension of their work with parents. So the practitioners said that they felt that, so their self-value, in fact, was very tied up in that work with parents as well as in the setting itself.
Yeah, go on. I've got two things to say. One thing was how awful it is that, given all the EPI evidence, and how many of you at the EPI symposium yesterday, but just the massive impact across time that good quality preschool has, and the fact that these early years practitioners didn't realise they had an impact or felt that they were undervalued. I mean, the evidence from their research is just overwhelming about even the impact that sort of low quality childcare has on children just astonishing afterwards.
Can I say this was one of the key things that came out of it for me? We said, you know, that's one of the outcomes, but one of the reasons why I wanted to, you know, I was really happy to be working with this group, because my background wasn't in the early years at all, but I have, as a consultant staff development now, worked a lot with lots of direct carers, so childminders, foster carers, residential social workers, early years practitioners. And what is common to all of them is that how little they are valued by other professionals. So you would get a child protection case conference and you get a paediatrician and a qualified social worker, and then you get either a foster carer or an early years worker, and they'd be dismissed. And actually a lot of my time was spent in, you know, teaching them assertion skills really, or so your purpose. So and saying, get to that case conference, you're the person who knows the child, you need to offer what you have to say. So I knew they weren't valued by professionals. What I really hadn't realised to what extent they didn't value themselves. I think I kind of assumed they did know that they were important, they just felt other people weren't valuing them. They didn't, despite everything that you say. And we were working with good settings, and we had, for example, I mean, you know, I really wanted to get out tomorrow morning, but a really experienced, good, qualified manager has just had her whole response to herself and her staff has been transformed in terms, and that has been, in a sense, we put that first in terms of the outcomes. That actually has been the most transformational aspect of this project, because they have come to the end and they really understand how important they are.
And it's self-awareness as a practitioner working with people is so vital. I talk to most of my tutoring with my PGC students is actually them finding some sort of the core of self-esteem and understanding about themselves, because they just can't expect to understand young people they're looking after if they've got poor self-knowledge and poor self-worth. I do quite a lot of kind of self-esteem building work with them. It's absolutely vital. Any kind of SEAL initiative has to start with the staff first.
And I think this is the value. I think Bernie will say more about this when we come to the back. I think giving early years workers the result of that project, long-term project, is not enough. Because to the individual, all the others might be, but I'm not. And I think there's something about human psychology that is really missed out. And I think we've learned it's taken about, you know, a year to get those practitioners.
And also the EPI research, it talks very much about teachers and early years settings and needing you know, the whole thing about children's centres having a qualified teacher in as much as, well, actually the message being, well, if you're not a teacher, you need a teacher to help you. That, you know, that's kind of endemic in a lot of our society, really.
Can I ask you about this pedagogical isomorphism? I don't think I entirely understand it. The containment bit. Can you tell me a bit more about how to understand that? Because I can see within yours you created a safe space for people to share stories. That's part of the containment.
That's providing support. In my the way I'm interpreting it, because I just see it as being this tension between, you want to challenge people to do their best, to improve what they do and take them slightly out of their comfort zone, to use Nigel's language this morning. But in order to do that, people do have to feel safe. So it's how you support them, how do you just create a safe, it is the safe space to enable them to develop their confidence. So I just saw that diagram and I think it just represents, if you get the language, the support and
it's an awful
I think she's missed that one out.
Yeah, but that was what was used to describe it, because with it being a process. But you know, it's that emotional containing those emotions, because who else? Where can you go to with that? And there's not.
It's all doing this kind of boundaries the action you can take, because I sometimes get overwhelmed with all the work there is to be done. But kind of knowing, well, this is one step I can take, so it's part of that containment, so making it manageable.
And I think this takes us on to the next stage, actually. I think that diagram is quite well, because we then wanted to find a way, how do we encourage these practitioners who are really out of their comfort zone in all of this, but we're beginning to get more comfortable telling stories, but they're not academics, and how do we encourage them to share their learning? I mean, we're here representing them at this particular conference because they don't have the money to pay the fees, which is an issue for BERA, but quite apart from that, how do we encourage them to articulate their own, what knowledge they've created? So we decided to put on a conference, because that would put on by them, not by us, by them, and and to support them again, it's presenting the challenge, but we would provide the support to enable them to do that. This is where Bernie came in. She hadn't been in up to now, but this time last year we were involved in a symposium where Bernie played a small add-on part to it, which actually affected everyone in the audience more than any other part of the symposium, really. So I spoke to Bernie to say, really, rather than her just coming in and having an add-on part, would she work with us right from the outset with the practitioners to find creative ways of enabling them to both articulate what it was they had learned and the knowledge they created, but also in ways of presenting it, because I thought I knew that we would go up, or not many of them would get up and do formal presentations, but they might be open to more imaginative ways. So, come on the stage, Bernie.
But just before Bernie's on, I'll just point out that even the title of the conference, the professional work of early years educators, every moment counts. You know, we were saying it was really important that with it being a collaborative inquiry, that they were involved in the decisions, and it was very much important.
We had a brainstorming with everyone in the group about all the possible titles, and then over time the distillation, people said this, that and the other, and it was
came out
chosen by the whole group in the end.
And particularly every moment counts, that resonates right through, I think, all the work, preparation for the conference, but also I think when the practitioners started to reflect on what they'd done. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so, so really, the initial challenge was, linked to our overall research question, was trying to use drama in the preparation for the conference, but to use it as an investigatory tool and also as a way of evidencing practitioners' experiences and also confirming them as researchers, so they're actually presenting something that they have reflected on and then in turn we're going to discuss further. We took as a starting point this idea of all of the practitioners, because they've gone through a process of telling stories and discussion, and this idea that Cousin suggested everybody is a storied individual, so you all have stories to tell, that they had shared stories in the context of discussion. The next stage then was how these stories could then be presented. And some of the participants, some of the practitioners said that they were willing to use drama as a means of presenting their experiences. And it's probably appropriate to say at this point that, you know, presenting practitioner issues in dramatic form, that's not unusual in itself. And Carter's done some work with, in fact, with teachers, teacher monologues, to explore personal and professional issues. And so it's a kind of reflective, narrative, autobiographical practice. And Taylor as well has talked about use of role play in drama, and saying that in effect, in drama, people are the instruments of inquiry. And this is something that resonated very strongly with our whole approach. So we talked about the idea of using role play, of using something devised, but it was very much, the idea was very much that it was up to the practitioners to decide what they wanted to do, and also to a certain extent how it would work. Having said that, many of them had come obviously new to this whole idea of research, new to the whole idea of drama. It was very challenging, really, the idea of using drama. And I thought at this point I'd just share with you some of the expectations. After the performance in the conference, I talked to them about what they felt about the use of drama. And some of these ideas then came across in terms of their, I suppose really this emphasised very much their uncertainty. So I'm voicing, and throughout just voicing some of the comments, observations, reflections of these practitioners throughout this process. So I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't understand it at all. And I think that was a comment relating to the whole thing. What exactly were we getting into? What were we doing? And then this is another practitioner in the group that did a little bit of drama. I thought it was going to be a prescriptive process. Number one, this is what we will do, etc. So the expectation that it would be shaped for them. And then this comment, I thought there would be actors for that who would interpret our feelings for us. Because we had talked about, because when I came in and Joan said, well, Bernie's going to help with the drama, and we did in fact have a professional actor who came in on the conference, but because our intention was very much that the practitioners, those who wanted to be involved, would be, but we weren't taking that for granted, because had it been that they'd said, we prefer you to use actors, that we're going to write this and then we'll let you present it. But in fact, it was much more interesting to have the practitioners themselves involved in the devising, and then it's so much more closely linked to their research. There was another comment that I think I should share with you as well, which kind of sums up this group who did the drama. One of them said, I didn't understand how in any shape or form we were going to put drama in it. Mm-hmm. So there was almost, sort of hearing that at the end of the process was very interesting, just to hear what they thought about, that, so they have this sense of trepidation. So let me say a little bit about how we use drama, and again, maybe you might want to comment a little bit on this. So we use drama in different ways. The evidence in the conference we had, at the beginning we presented that, it was a scripted dialogue, if you like, but we did have some sort of verbatim. So in fact, for that piece, we did a bit of filmmaking. So I filmed Joan and Janice just talking, because we thought we need to kind of somehow encapsulate that, what happened at the beginning, and would it not be interesting to do that as a conversation? And it was interesting the way that we did that. I think in the actual event, I don't think it worked out necessarily as successfully as we might have envisaged it, but actually the content, the actual scene setting, the idea of using it as a scene setting and recalling your what you'd said.
We had a conversation about how we came to meet in the first place and why we started to work together. We were just talking about it, feeling slightly artificial because we were being filmed. So I think that's what you mean by it.
I think it is accessible.
But actually what Bernie did, what we were saying was right, and what Bernie did was then took that away and changed that into the dialogue that you heard to start off the session with, which doesn't capture.
Which we then updated. But also what was interesting in reading that back was how it, in effect, you look at that dialogue and it seems there were bits that you had to edit quite, because you looked at it as it didn't seem very natural. It's very interesting when you look at the word, how the words and the,
So that's what I read, but that was the word you used, says Bernie.
Yes, exactly. So it's just interesting how how you then take you're scripting something from page to stage and vice versa. The other thing then, the key thing in the conference was to use drama as a storytelling device. So we had a convention of a cafe, and in the cafe we had two key players who met, a lecturer, myself, who had genuinely had little or no knowledge really of the nursery setting, so it was kind of inquiring, and then a manager of a nursery setting who was also a barrister, and the real life role. So it was very interesting, and I think if we talk more about roles, I think actually on reflection for myself as researcher, lecturer, there's lots of interesting intersections here in terms of how people's roles kind of played out. And we set up this convention of my asking her questions and deliberately using sort of certain stereotypes, the expectation that why would somebody manage a nursery setting if they trained as a barrister? You could be working now as a barrister. So we set up some stereotypes, and through that, this character was able to then tell the story of what happens in a nursery setting. What about this question? And so we sort of went into a series of scenes. So we had a discussion. These characters in the cafe. We had a discussion which was interspersed then with the devised drama pieces and also the presentations of the practitioners. So in effect, I've expressed this as a cast, but in fact there were very many different roles here in terms of the so lecturers, practitioners, and then the roles within the drama itself. So for the process, and in terms of the devising, I just represented it as a kind of a diagram just to show, because we followed really a model that you would use in terms of preparing a play or a traditional piece of drama. We had the discussion, the sharing of the stories, and that led in, for those who wanted to do something, into a sort of devising. In fact, a couple of short scenes initially in the conference, developing it in a rehearsal, which they did also in the nursery setting, performing it and then coming to a reflection about it, so post-performance kind of thinking about it, unpicking it, and what was the impact, and what was the impact on you, and in terms of the, what's going to happen now. And there's some interesting things that have emerged from that. And of course, I suppose if you carried on, the cycle would continue, would go to further discussion, where do we take this, what's the next stage. It was very important really at this stage when we talked about devising, and Joan, sure you'll agree on this, that in fact, that it, again, the fact that it belonged to the practitioners, they had to decide what they were going to do. They did go away and do it. It wasn't actors interpreting for them. So they had to write a scene or create something that we'd come back with. And we would have to, we would be looking at respecting what that was and trying to then use it in the conference.
And I think also the way of doing that was, again, going back to that model, especially the containment of a challenge bit, because we had we knew that we wanted the practitioners to put on the conference, but we didn't want all the same methodology, so we knew we had to mix the different forms of representation. We knew some of them would feel more able to do some more than others, but for some it was kind of really pushing them. They've been, stretching their zone of comfort throughout the process. So there was one young woman, for example, at one point dropped out of the project. She's actually said, I don't want to, I don't think I should be part of this project anymore. So Janice and I said, okay, but just let's kind of have one conversation about it. And so we went and talked to her about it, and it transpired. We were asking them to write stories, just write where they came from, what was important to them. And she didn't feel comfortable writing. We said, actually, that's not an issue. What's the issue is, do you care about what you do and about making a difference? And she said, yes, certainly, we really, really do. And I said, well, don't worry about that then. Don't feel you've got to write. If you just talk about it, I'll write it for you. Would you be okay with that? Fine with that. So that was the problem, that was it solved. So I met with her again, and she had some really, key accounts of things that had happened to her when she was a child, the significance of a teacher in her life, and one or two other events, very articulately spoken about. So I said to her at the end, I'd be really, I'm really happy to write this on your behalf, but actually, I think you could write that. Are you sure you don't want to? So here I was really getting that balance. If she'd said no, I would have gone away and written it. But clearly I was just pushing her to do it herself. And she said, actually, I think I could. And she went away and wrote it beautifully. She then said, and I won't go through all the stages, but bit by bit, just through that being pushed that little bit, but not too far, her confidence grew to the extent that she didn't actually do a live presentation, but she did a presentation on video, which was shown on the day, and then, again, in the last couple of weeks, because by this time she was beginning to buzz and saying, actually, I don't want to stop now, I'm getting to this point. She then came up on the front of the stage and was prepared to answer any questions that were given to her. And she would have said, and this was the person who felt that she just wasn't a single part of the project. So it was that kind of, so she did a video that was, she did a presentation that was videoed. There were 2 or 3 people who were prepared to do a live presentation, and then other people were responding to, well, how would you be prepared to do a role play? So that came back to the drama techniques again.
So just to say a little bit about the writing process and the devising, and the group who did this, they said on reflection they found it very difficult because it was group writing. They had never done anything like this before, and they had never presented anything in public like this before. And also the idea of dramatising something and devising the scene, it was difficult. One of them made the observation also about the roles that they had, because in effect 2 of them work with the children. There was one manager, plus there was also a tutor there. So the fact that the combination of roles, there was an obvious interesting point of discussion there. But the basic scenario that they came up with and they wanted to present was a scenario with a practitioner and a child, and they crafted a short scene with a child arriving in the nursery, practitioner also arriving in the morning, the child knowing that the practitioner wanting to show some artwork and painting, and the practitioner in her little speech talking about all her distractions, her worries, her concerns, her workload, kind of just ignores her or uses a few delaying tactics, pushes her away. And the child sits down very unhappily, and gets very frustrated, and as it develops, the child just pushes all the paint pots away and gets really upset and angry. And the idea was, and we discussed it then further with Joan, the idea was to take that, but also then to look at it from different points of view. So what might happen if the circumstances were different? And they agreed because they didn't want to show a difficult situation that couldn't be resolved or leave it hanging. They wanted then to look at how that could be resolved. Joan, we talked about the idea that they would have, that the practitioner and the child would have an alter ego to speak their kind of thoughts and their ideas as they were performing. Do you want to say a little bit more about that in terms of, because this we felt was quite a pivotal scene really in terms of the presenting the setting, but also then having the sort of the emotional text, but not necessarily from the child. So to try to get something more complex. Quite difficult to do really, but in fact, so you have the practitioner, so you have the child, and then you have the alter egos of each, so sort of speaking. So you've got them, interacting, but then you've got this voice speaking.
I suppose really, and I think we're all aware of this, we work with parents even, far less than we work with children and young people, how what it comes down to is the title thing, every moment counts. And I'm just always aware about how much power adults have over children and how much they can misunderstand perhaps what you say to them or how you say that to them. Through this project, it's became even more acute. You know, we're talking about these practitioners not valuing themselves, and yet they have our children 0 to 5, which are understood to be the most important in any person's life, the really formative years, and they are with them for all these seconds of every day. And so how they are with that child in every moment really, really counts. And yet to keep that form of attention every single moment, right here, right now, I can say, is hugely tiring. I mean, you know, it's like parents often say, don't they, I went back to work for the rest, because they know how draining it is. And there's something to me, how on earth do these practitioners not realise how important they are in this child's life when what they're doing is so significant? So it wasn't so much for them, but how do you communicate this to the audience, how significant they are? And so this idea of the alter ego was, because we all know that you do one thing and think the other, the idea is that, you know, the child may seem to be all right, but they're thinking of other things in the background. So the alter ego is really to show that there's a difference between the presenting and so people.
And dramatically, it's very interesting, of course, because then you can have the two actors, you know, showing something, then you're hearing something which is kind of at odds with what you're seeing. Or maybe not. So it was quite interesting to present that. What happened in practice, and this was an issue with the devising, was that I think that what the practitioners did was to write the scene, and then when they started to practice it, they were almost trapped by the words in a sense once they'd scripted it, because they hadn't physically done anything with it. And so one of the breakthrough moments really was when we had a discussion of what they had already scripted it, and we talked about how they might then go back and look at particularly the language of the child, the kind of things, because it was very the language of the child and the adult were not distinguishable really. That was one issue, and the scenario was very clear, but it was a question of what they wanted to get across. And what they wanted to get across was definitely the emotions of the child, how that child feels in that moment of inattention has had a really important impact. And they felt so strongly that just that one moment could then have another, you know, a ripple effect that is almost unimaginable. And that's what they wanted to get across. And equally, from the practitioner's point of view, that they wanted to show that practitioner, you know, in the morning when she comes in feeling the pressures of life and all these other tensions, that actually it's really hard to maintain that total commitment that is expected, so to meet that expectation.
To leave those stresses behind
Yeah.
and to just still remain focused on the needs of the child throughout the working day.
And the practitioner who played the alter ego of the practitioner said initially it was quite awkward being the alter ego of someone I'd never really met before or knew. So in fact part of their process of dramatization was to get to know each other, to try and make it as authentic as possible. So I think the breakthrough was definitely the physicalizing. So afterwards, the practitioner who played the alter ego of the child said, I thought the physicality helped me to understand it. Whether or not it came across on the day, it helped me to feel it on the day. And I think we're just coming back to really in terms of the impact on them, even in the performance, if the performance did not necessarily communicate itself to everyone in the room, in terms of what they got out of doing that and how it's fed into their returning to practice. It's very interesting. So she said, I definitely felt it, I felt that, and I felt it on the day. So we have got a little clip. I think the intention is not to show the clip. It's not to show the clip, really, the whole of the clip, which is to show the setup so you can see it. Because unfortunately the sound quality, there's quite a lot of microphone kind of feedback, so you can just see.
I think this in the two sides will give the aim of the what we're doing and what it came through at the end of it.
Yeah, so I just, in effect, what I thought would be useful is just to show you the, so you can actually sort of see the setup in the conference. I'm just going to take it on a little bit. So you have the two practitioners, you have the child, and then the alter ego sitting behind. And it is important to emphasise that neither of these practitioners have ever done anything like this before, and this was their choice in terms of how to present this particular scene.
These are two people, sorry, Jenny, who would not stand up and present for them. Absolutely.
I think it's probably just to be able to show that really perhaps just helps to kind of explain the scene. So you have the practitioner and the alter ego of the practitioner behind, and then you have the child. And in the first scene, then you have the angry scene, the paint pots get pushed to one side, and then they rerun it with the child, and the child then finds that the practitioner responds. And it's a very simple, sort of straightforward scene, really. And yet, out of that, there were lots of things that emerged. In a way, as a first attempt of trying to dramatise something, dramatise a moment that they felt could happen quite easily in any nursery setting. But for them, it had a particular significance. And I'll just make some comments now about what they said as of the post-performance analysis, really. So just to go back to it. So. So, just in terms of the performance, so we're talking about the particular practitioners who are involved in that. So, this big, huge lecture theatre, on the day, it felt like we were still in the nursery, just practising it, just doing it ourselves. I really didn't look out to the audience. And they all said that, in fact. They said they actually felt very comfortable, because they'd done it so many times, but they actually felt that they didn't worry. They were initially scared of the prospect, and it was a big, very full lecture theatre. But in fact, they were very focused on what they were doing. And so, in fact, this is the comment. The second comment is from the practitioner who played the alter ego of the practitioner. She just said, it was you and the group and the moment. So we were just, they felt as though they were doing it as they had already done it, which I found was very interesting. And the alter ego of the child, who said, there is no way I could have stood up and spoken as, she's referring to another colleague, as she did. But doing that, I felt fantastic. I just felt like I was baby Emma's voice. It was the child's voice, and no one is going to judge the child's voice, so that was okay. So it was really, that was so interesting because it's all of this, you could analyse very, very easily this notion of role and how, as an actor, when you assume a role, in a way, you know, you can relate to that role, but in fact, you can also hide behind that role, but that role, somehow, there's a lot of complexity there. But very much, no one's going to judge the child's voice. She knew it to be true. She knew that this was something that she had observed, and they'd written it to make it sound, as authentically as possible. And again, I think it's probably quite important at this stage to say that this particular practitioner then went on to say, I just loved being inside the child's head, and I still do now. So what she was saying that she definitely had taken it back into the setting. And she said that she felt that if other people could see that as well, that they would also, those who'd seen it in the conference would also perhaps be able to relate to that and remember that in the moment. Let me just extend that a little bit. This is what she said. It might depend on what type of learner or what type of person you are. Probably some of those people in the audience, when they go back into their settings, they might remember how you knocked those things out of the way. And maybe not totally be in the moment all the time, but there are going to be occasions throughout the day when that will come back to them. That image of you being upset might touch them and maybe might make them not react so bluntly. And they also felt that they wanted to take it back into the setting and actually perform it there and to kind of really sort of tease out some of the issues that had emerged really from doing that. Okay. In terms of the post-performance reflection, there are probably more things to say, but really the key things that I think came across. I think it's helped me now in my job to realise the moment by moment more. And then the other thing is, and about the reflection about using drama for the first time, the whole notion of actually doing it and physicalising it. But talking about it doesn't really sink in as much, but actually doing it, being in it, it really sinks in more now. That was really helpful. So the fact that they felt that the physicalising, actually doing that has given them something they can then definitely take back into the practice. And also, in terms of their relationship with the audience, a comment came through. I don't think the audience, would have understood, if I just stood up and talked about it, these are the feelings that children have, I don't think anyone would have understood it or got a sense from it. And then they made comments about their manager who came up to them and talked about how she was quite moved by what they had done and also the whole kind of scenario. The final thing that I would like to say on this, and this is really important in terms of the kind of impact for the practitioners, is just the idea that they agreed that they definitely wanted to take the story further. In a sense, and even looking at the dialogue, it seems a very simple and straightforward dialogue, but what it opened up was a whole world of possibilities in terms of how they could use that. And just a further insight, just to kind of get a sense of the measuring of the impact, again, as the practitioner played the alter ego said, I'd like to explore the story itself further. I'd love to be able to tell Emma's story as the practitioner and the child. And then the child maybe being told off for knocking those paper pots out of the way, and how practitioners go on to label someone, he has temper tantrums, she's a bit of a strop. And all of those things, and how that situation has been caused by the practitioner and not the child. And how continuing to ignore the child or label the child or disregard their feelings can go right through school, and then that child can be labelled a problem child and continues not to be listened to just because that practitioner didn't have time on that day. So it's really kind of out of that and that one comment, quite a powerful acknowledgement of the things that might happen if you take that to its conclusion. So I think overall, what I'd like to say in terms of the impact of the drama, certainly for this group of practitioners, it allowed them to get inside the head of the child. I think that the group discussions that they had early on definitely facilitated their writing, their imaginative writing. I think that allowed them to sort of get into that. I think certainly from what they have said, the evidence that physicalising the emotions was extremely important. It might seem a given, but not if you are new to presenting something dramatically. And it opened the possibilities of kind of analysing and looking at their experiences quite creatively. And it really did deepen their responses to the moment by moment to make them think about that. And it also confirmed their value as sort of researchers looking at their practice. And it certainly allowed their passion to come across in terms of their work as practitioners. And all of them agree that they're now looking at the next, how they could then develop this further.
And I just think how to measure impact is really interesting because, just
Yeah.
to take one example, one person said to me, I now find myself talking with colleagues about how important being in the moment is. And I'm thinking, this is to a local authority who wants to see the quantifiable outcomes. How do you quantify something like that? The ripple effect of someone, the impact themselves and how they are moved by the world, but the conversations they're having with colleagues in other contexts. Very, very good.
I'm really interested in oral literacy, and I was interested in every child talker, and just what kind of happened with that. It was a tiny amount of money really, but the resources that went out into early years, and some of them were really good, but kind of how just getting your package resources, because it was sort of talking through the issues together, and what impact, if any of the participants, and what impact their own time for talking had given in terms of their understanding of time to talk with the children. Does that come out at all?
Yeah, I had my ECAT hat on then. I was thinking about how ECAT was used. And I think that idea, and I think one of ECAT has been very significant in our local authority anyway, because it was very much a process thing, and it wasn't just a one-off training event, and it took that, but there were issues with that. I think this talking together, it's a bit going back to what Maggie Wally was saying about us modelling. If we can model it amongst ourselves, then actually that's mirrored then in the interactions with their children.
Children sensitise the power of talk much more because they've lived the theory of it.
Yeah, and like listening, really listening to children, really consulting with children. I think that, and in terms of from the local authority and what was the initial thing, that transformative learning and that reflective practice and being much more reflective, and that is going to impact on lots of other things. It's not about someone telling me what to do. It's about me engaging with those children and being able to spiral.
And Janice may have got evidence of that. I haven't had evidence that it's had that impact. I mean, just thinking about it, I haven't heard people talk about that next step, actually.
That could be, couldn't it? If you like, the next step, where the stories are going.
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind, and it's up to you, that was a really powerful question.
Yeah.
This on YouTube, to allow the practitioners, the early years practitioners, to see what we've done at BERA. That question then about every child a talker, how might we do this? I think that would be lovely for them to actually see and hear that question. But if you wouldn't mind,
that's fine.
And it's the idea that this is very much of a process, and actually just because that was last term, that it hasn't just finished, that we're going to explore ways of developing that in whichever way we can, and the practitioners want to.
I just asked something. I suppose it is scribbling things down as I was listening. Was there any sense in which this notion of every moment counts became a hugely scary, overwhelming responsibility? Because I remember thinking that as a parent, when I first had children, that if I made the slightest mistake, I was kind of damaging, and yet I had my own needs, which I kind of felt society expected me to subsume completely and foreground entirely the needs of my children, which I found I couldn't do because I had my own needs. Do you know what I mean? And I just wonder, is it generally young women you were working with who have their own needs? And did you build recognition of the importance of them allowing themselves to have their own needs into the process? Because it sometimes feels as if they're being given this huge responsibility that every moment counts. Well, you know, they have their own needs.
I
as
think,
well.
I mean, being
Do you
gentle
know
on
what I
yourself
mean?
and all of that, being
Yeah,
realistic.
yeah.
I think the kind of message I always do, how explicitly I did it in this context, but you know, everybody's needs are important,
Yeah.
so it's, you know, I'm important and you're important, the whole assertive thing really. How I've done that kind of historically is, and you can do that. I think people underestimate how much children can understand. And I think as long as from the very earliest stages, you know, I tell this story of my 6-year-old daughter who one day, and I came in and, you know, it just became known that I'd get ratty if I was tired, and lo and behold, you know, if I was cold as well, that was just awful. But this one day, and I must have done something, you know, even though they were, and she just said, she goes, just because you're tired after a long day at work, Mum, there's no need to take it out on me, you know. And actually, one, it snapped me out a little bit of, you know, realised I'd been ratty, but the other thing was, wow, she knows it's actually not about her, the fact that I'm not in the best kind of mood. So it's also about, you know, if that practitioner had come in and said, look, you know, I'm really having a really hard day at home, things aren't quite right, I've just got to spend 5 minutes and then I'll come and be with you. Really good what you're doing, so please just learning to discuss it.
Yeah,
learning to communicate that I have needs as well.
Yeah.
It's great, it's fine to acknowledge you're not perfect, it's fine to acknowledge you have needs, but explain it somehow. Children, I think the difficult thing is practitioners and parents don't even think of where the child's at, so don't think there's anything to explain. So there's a lot of work to be done around that. And then yes, that was part of this conversation.
And that you know, it's fantastic to hear about this process of what they got from collaboration, and that collaboration needs to continue for them to have that space to talk, to build their own kind of persona up in order to be able to work better with the children.
And many of them were doing it, and I think Jack and I and Janice, one way or the other, went out to 4 of the different centres because the managers brought this to the whole staff team. So you know, we don't know how far, but they wanted to make this. The idea was that this would go out to the whole of the nursery, and so we went out and spoke about each of them, identifying what their values are, what matter to them, and how they make a difference. And certainly, even if this project doesn't go on or not, there's awareness amongst the whole staff team. And obviously, it falls by the way a little bit, but it's a little bit like, you know, it will have made a difference, and it will influence how they are.
I mean, we do have evidence. I mean, my role as a cold quality improvement officers, and that sort of idea of action planning and feeling that those actions were coming from what they were identifying as important and what needed to be, not what the local authority said you need to do this, or you know. So the Zenkos, particularly, I was looking at, you know, explore. I'm going to try and explore this new way of showing this information with parents. I'm going to try and do that, and you know, in each setting, not every person, but some people had like action plans that they're thinking of doing. So that's been great.
Yeah, you haven't yet stressed really on it, and that is both Janice and Joan in their visits. They paid really careful attention and follow things up. So when they said about that person actually feeling that she would withdraw, it was that attention. Okay, now it was only about 6 months ago that I really got on the inside of why, for example, Joan was doing this, and it came out in the sense she has this feeling of a responsibility for the well-being towards all. Now, again, because I was coming to it from a different position, it took me some time to recognise how that relational quality and responsibility for all, which Janice actually is brought together with that initial inquiry, you know, with a real care and passion and concern. And that's something that somehow we don't stress because it's a self-evaluation. You know, it's almost like others have to see it and then bring it to the attention.
And could I just say something, because Marie mentions, I nearly mentioned it this morning, because there's a real distinction to be made. Marie said something in her presentation earlier on about not taking responsibility for somebody else, but feeling responsibility towards them. She was differentiating, and I'm thinking, I must really be clear, I never take responsibility for, I never feel responsible for anyone at all. Everybody needs to take responsibility for themselves. But what I do, when I say that, I have a sense of responsibility for the well-being of all. It's creating environments, it's creating contexts where, or just one way, you know, people can be challenged but also supported. It's not about me taking responsibility for that person at all, but how do I create a context that enables that person to be the person they were born to be, really, and how do I support that process, both as challenge and as support.
Revisiting their choices, I think, is very significant. Let's say you give them the opportunity to talk it through, and if students decided to walk away from the project, you would really felt satisfied that you had the chance to work through it, which is how I feel when I'm doing tutorials with my students. It's not about my judgment, it's about making sure they've had a chance to think through their choices.
I'm just conscious of time, and it's, you know, we should be finishing now, but it's just that, is there anything else that anybody just wants to ask?
Just one thing.
Yes, please.
Can you just explain a bit what you mean by mindfulness?
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming a big word at the moment, actually. It's quite interesting. It has its roots, or one of its roots, in Buddhist. I mean, I introduced the word to them, actually, because they were talking, they came up with the importance in the present moment of paying attention right here, right now. And that just reminded me of a Buddhist term, which is mindfulness, which is really just being in the moment. Now, the Buddhists take it quite extensively. I get, because I'm not very mindful a lot of the time, I forget the keys and all this. And they'll say, when you're eating a meal, just focus on each mouthful that you have. So it's got, and in fact, there's a conference in St Mary's in Twickenham on mindfulness and contemplation at the end of next June. But it's just about being in the moment and being, not having your mind detracted by yesterday or tomorrow or shopping lists or whatever, but just how am I sitting, what am I doing, how am I talking to yourself, not being distracted by other things.
It's also used by cognitive behaviour therapists as a way of getting people to re-script their responses. So if you have a particular kind of triggers that then lead to a series of behaviours that you practice, they try and get you to be conscious of the trigger, and hopefully that will stop you taking the first step of behaviour. But if you do react, then sit with the reaction. So you try and stop that kind of snowballing effect where people have destructive, self-destructive behaviour, which can just be entirely psychological, also rubbish, also terrible. But it's about sitting with feelings and being fully mindful of the way that you are. And it's used a lot with people with chronic depression through cognitive behaviour.
Stress, John Sabat-Zinn has picked it up and uses it a lot in stress management, and psychologists are using it a lot, and it's being used a lot in the kind of mental health field with people, which is the aspect of what you're talking about, isn't it? But really to stop people going on with things.
You okay? Just in terms of the, you see, what seems to happen in this is that you feel that a really beautiful presentation, okay, that's it. But why I like doing stuff on YouTube is that people can now access, you know, what has actually happened today, because it does feel to me really worthwhile communicating that, not just the early years practitioners, but to a much wider audience. Yeah. So if you both, John, I can get yours, but if you would like me to leave me your email, I could just email you with the URL when it's actually there.
That'd be great, thank you.
Yeah. And just a thank you. You know, I mean, that's really good.
Thank you.